make life much easier for them, they were exempted. And the perishability and non-perishability, they're sort of defining factors or determining factors. In other words, you use them to differentiate between the ones that should be taxed and that ones should not be taxed. So therefore, and then second, like I said before, the perishability and non-perishability were you judge from their natural status and a natural perspective. So the non-perishable one, which is non-perishable, and which is, without human interference, and the one which is perishable also without human interference, are the one that are meant by this rule of zakat. So now that development has come, technology has arrived, and with human endeavor, with human intervention, so many things can be resolved. Well, I think this is just it was part of the mercy of God, mercy of Allah, that Subhanahu wa Taala, that has come to make life easy for Muslims. So they cannot change the rule of Sharia, which is based mainly on rahmah or on mercy and the removal of hardship and difficulty. Wallahu alam.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Now, when we were tackling zakat for animals, for example, cattle, you said that if you have 40 which stayed with you for a year, you need to give zakat out of that. Now, in an instance in which you have 40, now maybe 8 months after or 11 months after, one died. Let's take it this way. It died in the morning, and before evening, another one is born in the same herd. Now, what is Islam's take on a situation like that?
Yeah, you see, there are usually 4 conditions, for that governed the obligation of zakat. Together they answer the question on as to who is supposed to give zakat or who is obliged to give zakat. Of course, the first one, which was hurriya or free, or being a free person, probably will not apply today because slavery doesn't exist in Islam anymore. But the factor of being a Muslim, because it's Islamic obligation, Muslims are addressed to give zakat. So the person must be a Muslim, and the person also must own nisab. And if it is let's say gold, silver, and animals, with the 3 categories of animals that we mentioned before, another condition is that the taxable amount must have stayed with the owner for at least a period of 1 year. The another condition, which is the 4th one, is in those systems where zakat is centrally collected. There's a zakat collection department, or you have zakat collectors, like you have Department of Revenue Collection today. The arrival of the zakat collector was another condition. So in other words, all these conditions have to exist, and the zakat collector must have arrived before zakat becomes due. And this being the case now, anything can happen in the meantime. If you take, for instance, cattle, or take, for instance, sheep, a goat, the minimum taxable amount is 40. If you own 40 and they're about 1 year, even a day before 1 year or 2 days before 1 year, one of them die, and therefore the taxable amount falls from 40 to 39, and 39 is not taxable, so there's no zakat. You understand? So if let's say when there's only 3 days to go, one of them dies, and therefore the taxable amount drops now from 40 to 39, which is not taxable, is non-taxable. So if the next day a new one is born, you have to count, you have to begin counting again from the very day, or from the very moment that the nisab or the taxable amount is fulfilled by the arrival of the newborn. So that is the situation. In fact, in some of the ulama, even if the period is completed, how do you call it, 1 year is completed, but the tax collector has not arrived yet. It is 1 year now. Zakat will soon become due. But one of the conditions is that the tax collector must have arrived in those situations where zakat is collected by a revenue collector or tax collector. So if one of them dies, even after 1 year, before the tax collector arrives, some of the ulama, then the nisab has dropped. You understand? The taxable amount has dropped, and therefore is not subject to zakat. Except, of course, in those situations where there is no zakat collected. Like in our own case, we don't have a centralized system where zakat is collected by the state or by a particular centralized collecting authority. So in this case, when it is 1 year, fully 1 year, if one of them dies as a result of, let's say, negligence by the owner, then he will be obliged to pay the zakat. But even if it happened after 1 year, one of them dies and the nisab drops, but the incident is not his fault. It's a purely act of God. It's not his fault. Then zakat will not be due. It will be waived on him. Wallahu
Yeah,
alam.
but
Yeah.
following that, Ustaz, it means the law must have changed then, because if Allah says 1 year and it gets to 1 year, supposedly I will say that either the tax collector comes or not, you should give out one. Yeah, but when it has to be based on the tax collector, then it will be
No, what you need to understand is there's what they call shurutu wujub and shurutu sihah, conditions that are necessary before a duty becomes a duty, before an obligation becomes an obligation, and the conditions also that are necessary to be fulfilled in order for you to do it to do it properly. So if those one of them is missing, even if you are obliged to do, when you do it, it will not be correct. It will not be valid. But for these four conditions that I have mentioned to you, according to the Fuqaha, particularly the Fuqaha al-Malikiyya, they are both conditions of obligation and conditions of validity. So Al-Quran al-Kareem is a book of general principles. You need a lot of how do you call it, allied sciences, principles, in order for you to be able to understand the message of Al-Quran al-Kareem. For you to understand the message properly, you need the linguistic sciences, you need the legal sciences, you need the science of law, you need quite a number of important principles that you put together before you can get the message clearly. So in other words, you are not supposed to run after literal interpretation, otherwise you run into serious mistakes, Abu Bakr. So I mean, this is what the ulama says, and that is the case. But again, like I said, this is only applicable to those societies or communities where there is a system of zakat collection.
Okay.
But in our own system here, where there is no zakat collection, or zakat is not centrally collected, as soon as it becomes 1 year, or as soon as the year is completed, zakat becomes due on you. But I'm saying that if after that, if one of them dies, not as a result of your ignorance, your negligence, but as a result of purely act of God, then the zakat will be waived. Wallahu alam.
Okay. You were saying something about the issue of tax collection, zakat.
Yeah.
Yes. During the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ummah was a government, more or less.
Yeah.
The Prophet was the head of state, he was the head of government, the head of administration.
Yeah.
Right? So those who collect tax are part of his government.
Yes.
Now, in this present era, we have a government, we have a revenue authority, which collects its tax.
Yeah.
Now, in any way, could you balance the collection of tax and the issue of zakat?
Yes, yes.
Can you put it in the same in the same package?
You see, in the modern time, there is a difference between an Islamic state and a Muslim state. We in this country may be a Muslim country, a Muslim state, but we are not an Islamic state. In the modern art of governance, particularly Islamic governance and administration, when you say Islamic state, you're referring to a state which adheres to the principle of Islam, Islamic governance, whether in the area of law application, in the area of banking and finance, in the area of any other area of government. When Islam is being applied in the governance system, then there's an Islamic state. Now, in this case, the state will collect the revenue. Zakat is a very important source of revenue, not only for the masakin or the poor, but for the state too. When the revenue is collected, when zakat is collected by the state, some of them will go to individual poor people or the needy people, but a large chunk of it also will go to other, socio-economic programs of the state. So it used to be an important source of revenue for the Islamic state, and therefore there will be no difference between revenue and zakat as far as the Islamic state is concerned. The zakat itself becomes a source of revenue for the Islamic state, but in our own situation where we have a Muslim majority country, ours is not an Islamic state, ours is a Muslim state. Yeah. Because it's a Muslim state, these are two different obligations. One is a purely Islamic obligation, and the other one is a civic obligation of the citizen of this country. So when you pay your revenue to the state, that is your responsibility, your civic obligations, and that will not waive the zakat, because these are two different. You are now serving the how do you call it, the needs of two different authorities. You understand? So you give zakat is a different thing, and the direction is different, the obligation, the rules are different, the recipients are, of course, completely different, and then the governing principles are quite different too. So in other words, in this case, you have to give zakat when zakat becomes due according to the teachings of Islam, whether it is farm produce,